the thing that I've found is a lack of standardization in the VC field, or at least the early stage. It's a lot about, it seems like there's touch points. Like we have touch points with investors, people have touch points, and then things seem to be going well, but things fall off for one or another reason, which is fine. That's how this works. Nobody's feelings hurt. But I think where founders are starting to get frustrated, it sounds like your platform really kind of fits this gap, is there's never criteria, because then you see them invest in another company that may even be earlier stage than you and less signals, and it's frustrating. And I think when you see statistics come out that are less than 2% of all founders of color receive capital, it starts to feel like, well, you can find me. I was in front of a investor, right? I was in front of a investor. They chose no, and they chose to invest in another company that may be earlier. So I think that level of accountability or standardization is really what this space is missing. And I think founders are beginning to be frustrated.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, you can use whatever stat you want. They're all
Mm-hmm.
relatively the same. You can say, there's a stat that I was just looking at, 92% of all the funding, $150 billion go to all white male investors.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, if you kind of double click on that, and they went to 10 universities. That's it. So you start, so
Yeah.
that other 8%, goes to the rest. Part of it is, if you look at the kind of the history, well, where did that venture capital, managing director go? He probably went to one of those universities. Well,
Mm-hmm.
where is the network that he's developed? He developed it at the country club. Okay, so you start thinking about, they go to, who they know, who they trust, and so this technology is a way to level the playing field.
Yeah. It reminds me of global intellect, right? They have this particular intellect that, like, I have to learn, or people have to learn. If you don't come from that, you're not aware of it, right? Then are we really that surprised? If there's a lack of global intellect in the VC or investment space, is it that surprising that, like, you need a technology to help equal the playing field?
But the exciting thing about this is, as we started this, there's a number of investors, both diverse investors that are looking for diverse companies and diverse founders. So the capital is out there, okay, but they don't have any way to connect, because they don't belong to the same country club. They don't go to the same, town restaurants, whatever. So how do you find them,
Yeah.
right? And I was telling someone, it was really interesting when I was talking about. I said, so just do this for a second. Spend a week and not use LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, what? That's every time I want to look up somebody. Every time, that's my point. So think about, that's where the diversity side of the world is, with no technology.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's such a good point. It does make me wonder, when we talk about, so to bring kind of back to companies that are looking to, we're going to leave the VC side alone for a minute. When we talk about these companies that are looking to create more inclusive companies, looking to increase their global intellect, what is your recommendation, and what are the biggest challenges they're facing?
The corporations.
The corporations, yes.
So one, I'll just give you a couple of interesting data points that people may not know about. I don't know if you've ever heard of the $1 billion roundtable.
Yes.
You have.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what's about 30 companies, 35 companies that have committed to spend $1 billion every year with diverse companies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you think about trying to spend $1 billion, at $10,000 a time, you never get there.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to find, where do we find diverse companies at scale that are ready to go, so I could spend $1 billion, spend $2 billion, spend $3 billion. So the corporations are having a difficult time finding corporations that have already been, I would call, curated and ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done on the platform, for example, is is by invitation only.
Mm-hmm.
So either the corporations can say, here's companies I've worked with that I think are ready to go work with other corporations. And then you have the certification bodies, whether it's, WeBank for women-owned companies, et cetera, that they actually have some of their top tier diverse companies that they recommend.
Yeah.
And so it's really, again, connecting the dots, because you can't spend the money if you can't find them. So what ends up happening is you have 5 or 6 companies that are growing to be multi-billion-dollar companies because that's the only ones they can find.
Yep. It's interesting. I was lucky enough to be we're a designated minority supplier as well. So I was lucky enough to attend one of the conferences here and hear United speak on the same thing because they had pledged to spend. I don't know if it was $1 billion, but I think it was several hundred million. Um, but they talked about it and they were like, and she said at the time, she's like, I think the way we're trying to think of United differently, and this just made me think of this, was that they were like, we're trying to take large projects and split them up into smaller ones so companies can get those projects and then grow. I was like, that's actually a really interesting, and I want to get your take on it. I was like, that's a very interesting strategy because it does help companies. I may not be ready for the $10 million contract just based on headcount, supplies, my ability to fulfill the requirements of the contract, but I might be able to do a $1 million contract, which might be huge for my business and be a stepping stone for me to be able to take 10 million. What do you think of that approach that some companies are taking versus?
It's a great initiative. It's
Mhm.
very difficult to implement
Okay,
because what they're finding out, they just don't have the infrastructure or the resources to onboard 10,000 small companies.
that's a good
And
point.
so, from a leadership standpoint, it's great. But when you drive it down to the procurement side, they're like, look, we don't have the resources to bring on, 20 or 30 new diverse companies.
Yeah,
And so one of the things that we've been talking to them about, and it actually has resonated, is what we call our strategic partnership um, platform or initiative, where let's say you and I partner together and go in to bid that business. So it's not 1 million and 1 million, it's 2 million or 3 or 4 million because you now have a group of MBEs that will go in and present their proposal
I
to the
love that.
companies. The other thing that we start implementing is what we call a tier one, tier two. So you have a large tier one that actually will bring the tier two, the smaller MBs, to bring them to the table. So you already have all the infrastructure because think about these large corporations. The first thing they're going to ask you as an MBE, well, do you have a $5 million insurance policy?
Yeah,
Okay. Do you have, the infrastructure to do data security, data protection? Well, no, I'm a startup. Okay. Okay. So when you start looking at, that initiative, but then you look at the contractual side
yeah,
that they require you to jump through in the hoops, it doesn't connect.
yeah.
And so that's one of the things in terms of partnerships. We actually, since we rolled out the platform, a number of the MBs have gotten together and said, let's team up and
Yeah.
go after that deal, and let's team up with some of the big ones and the smaller ones. And so, but that's what everybody does
Yeah.
outside of what we're talking about. DEI, corporations do that all the time.
Yeah.
You even have, Microsoft partnering with IBM, Deloitte partnering with HP. They all partner to go after opportunities. Same thing we have to do.